Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Live Chat. Today is August the 16th of 2020. Wow, what a year 2020 has been so far. I hope all of you are doing well this fine Sunday afternoon, and welcome to Live Chat on Piedmont Trails. Say hi to me. Let me know that you're here. Um, Tell me where you're from. And I asked you guys a couple of questions before we get started with tonight's live chat, and that was how many of you have ancestors that moved from one colony to another prior to the American Revolutionary War? And I'm sure there's a great many of you out there that can verify that your ancestor moved from one particular colony to another. And for the most part, I would say it would be from a northern colony or a middle colony to a southern colony during that time period, because these particular years included the greatest migration in our nation's history, prior to our nation, really. That It's an amazing time period to research, and I've been researching this particular time period for since the early 1990s, a long time. But let me know how many of your ancestors traveled from one colony to another. And do you know why they moved? Um, do you know the reasons why they moved? And there's various reasons why these early families decided to move from one particular place to another. It was a hardship to move during this time period. It was a big thing. It was a big event. And it included a lot of people, not just one particular family, but it included a vast amount of families that traveled. And I'll get into that more here in just a second, because that goes into the second part of this: who traveled with them and why, and what roads did they take. I'll go into that too, but you share with me what you know so that we can all join in the conversation and talk about the early migration patterns. How long did it take for them to travel? It depends. And what provisions did they take with them? So let's go ahead and get started with live chat. I want to welcome you guys again. And as far as how many of you have ancestors that moved, how many of my ancestors actually moved? A great many of them. Researching my family tree through the Piedmont area of North Carolina, a great many of my ancestors traveled the early roads, especially during the years from 1745, 1744, up to the point of the American Revolutionary War. They took various routes as well. They settled in different areas. So these important things can lead you to the right path in which your ancestor took. But we'll begin with, do you know why they moved? I began researching my family tree and finding out on why the reasons that they moved, and going back to where they started from, and researching that particular area in great depth. Um, I have ancestors who left because for religious reasons. They were no longer welcomed in their community church. This was one of the reasons why I had a family to embark on an adventure and travel hundreds of miles away. I also have a family who that was their original destination was North Carolina, and it just so happened that the only ship that they could take was arriving in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, during the year 1735. And years later, they decided to migrate and reach their original destination of North Carolina, and that occurred 30 years later. Um, so there's several reasons why our ancestors left. If you go back to the original home site and where they were living, dig into those records, you are more likely to find the reason why they left. It could have been a group of family and friends getting together and making the decision together. Oh, we hear of there's land opportunity, there's this offered here, there's this in Virginia, and so on. And that decision was made as a group. So if you dig back to the old records of where your family traveled from, you're more likely to understand more of the reasons why they traveled. Who, one of the questions to ask when you're going back to that settlement and where you're trying to research and determine why your ancestors moved, did they own property in that area? That's one of the key questions to ask. Did they own property? I had several family members who did own property in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and northern colonies as well. And I had other family members who didn't own property. But that's an important question. Another important question would be, were they indentured servants years prior to them leaving? And that's another important aspect to look into. And like I stated earlier about religious reasons, were there religious reasons that pertain to your family? And could it have been other possibilities, such as were there political events going on, or that involved that particular your ancestor, or was he delinquent in paying certain bills? You know, colonial period was a completely different atmosphere in which we live in today. So things that we may not think are so relevant in today's perspective were very, very important back during the colonial period. And they could have caused a family to pick up their gatherings and their belongings and move elsewhere. Also, were there Native American Indian raids? And were they living more inland, away from the eastern seashore? And this caused the family to move elsewhere. So there's all kinds of scenarios when it comes to the reasons why. But if you dig into the original destination and find out as much detail as you can, then you're most likely to find out why the reasons they may have left. I've got people coming in here. Paula says, I can't hear, so you can't hear me. So are there others who says that they can't hear me? Don't know. Paula, I hope you're feeling better, and I hope that sore throat is better today. Angela says, many of mine traveled from Pennsylvania to western North Carolina after the Revolutionary War. I have had difficulty finding records for those who traveled south before the war. That's a critical time period too, and you're going further south. I'll get into more on that in just a second, Angela, but that's a very good question. And I want to make sure that you guys are hearing me, so if you can't hear me, let me know. I need to adjust a mic or something here. Okay? Okay. Okay. The second part of this question was, who traveled with them? Make no mistake about this. Your ancestor and their family did not travel alone. They did not embark on this adventure with one sole wagon filled with personal items and provisions and take off on a hundreds-mile journey by themselves. It just didn't happen. All families, oh, Angela says, I'm hearing you. Good. Thank you, Angela. Thank you. All families traveled with other families. It was a party that traveled. It was a party, it was a group that traveled. Regardless of the route, regardless of the destination, regardless of how long the trip was, they were equipped with families traveling together. This is a given. It would have been extremely, extremely rare for someone to come upon, say, for instance, the King's Highway in 1740 and find a family traveling alone. It was very rare, very rare. So families travel together. This is a helping point when we're researching. And because if you concentrate on your family's final destination and where they settled after they traveled, and you look at their neighbors that are living near them, these are clues and hints of possibilities of families who traveled with them. And if you get those surnames and then go back to the records of where your family came from and see if those same names came from that settlement, this gives you a good idea of who traveled with your family. That's one way of researching it. Let me go through my notes and make sure that I didn't leave out anything with that. Who settled with your family, and also when did your neighbors appear near your family once they reached their final destination? Always look around the local area. You're going to find tons of clues and hints that pertain to your family. Don't just limit your research just solely on your family surname and your immediate family. Broaden the horizons a little bit and look outwards. You always find tons of clues and hints when you do this. Let's see if let's see. Angela says she was hearing me. Okay, Gail says, I have found that some of my ancestors came to North Carolina and received land from King of England, a land grant. This was during the time that England was encouraging folks to move to the colony. Yes, land grants were very important during our genealogy research for a lot of our ancestors, and this enticed them to move elsewhere. Land is one of the biggest reasons why, and this goes back to the 18th century colonial period. What was it like to live during the 18th century? It was all about land. Why? Because land gained automatic respect. It assigned you a title. It filled you with honor. This was highly sought for during the colonial period. This is what every man wanted. He wanted recognition for who he was. In order to prosper during this social time in the colonial period, he needed to own land in order to prosper his family. He needed to own land to vote. He needed to own land to participate in any political event. Some areas he needed to own land to operate a business. Okay? Depends on the area. But yes, it was a social status of owning land. And that was the primary reason why many families decided to migrate from one area to another. What roads did they take? Do you know what roads that your ancestors traveled on during this time period before the American Revolutionary War? It greatly depends on the timeline, when they left, and when did they arrive. So you've got several major roads during different specific time periods. The oldest road, of course, is going to be the King's Highway. And this is the road that travels all along the eastern seaboard. This is not a very well maintained road. A lot of people during that time period didn't even like to use the road. It was a dangerous road, as all roads were during this time period. And it didn't travel inland, and there was not much opportunity. If they were looking for land, majority of the land along the eastern seaboard was already taken. A lot of settlements had already been there for many years. So that's one route, and that's the oldest route. The second oldest route would be probably the Fall Line Road, or what I like to call the Trader's Path. This is a cutaway, an extension that occurred during Fredericksburg, Virginia, away from the King's Highway, and it extended more inland. This road came about during let's see, my notes have on here, between 1710 and 1720. This was used as a trading road first. And I have found that many of my ancestors were tradesmen. they traded along these early routes. That's how they knew about the lands available in North Carolina and further inland in South Carolina and even further south into Georgia, western portions of Virginia. And that's how they found out about a lot of these lands and what was available. That's how they got to know the terrain, knew the area. So they were tradesmen and they'd already traveled these routes. The fall line was fall line road or trader's path was very popular. Most areas you could carry a wagon. Although there were some areas that was still a footpath during this time period, so it greatly depends on the timeline in which they traveled. The another extension of the fall line road is the upper road. The upper road extended out from the fall line road in the same area at Fredericksburg, Virginia. This extension occurred between around 1730 and 1740. A lot of people get these roads mixed up. Oh, mine came down the fall line road. It went through, this way. Mine came down the upper road. Oh, the upper road is another name for the Great Wagon Road. No, it's not. I have been researching roads for many, many years. And the upper road is definitely an extension of the fall line road, which is an extension of the King's Highway. So you've got the main highway, the King's Highway, then you got a little extension of Fall Line Road, and then you got the other, the upper road. The upper road actually went a little further inland, okay? It went more towards the center of the state of Virginia and came southward this way. This occurred, like I said, between 1730 and 1740. If you pay attention to population and how settlements are established, you will see how these roads are created and where and when. That's a excellent key factor to pay attention to. The Great Wagon Road. The Great Wagon Road is a altogether different puppy. This road originated as the Great Warrior's Path. It was a well-known trading path. Once again, the tradesmen going back and forth with these roads, trading with the Native Americans, and they're getting fully aware of the terrain, what's going on, what lands are available, getting the word out. And thus the Great Warrior's Path was already a road. However, you couldn't navigate the route with a full wagon. It was a footpath in many, many places, and it went through very rough terrain, very rough mountainous terrain. But it began as a road, as a safe road, so to speak, around 1744. But I have been able to prove that I have family members who actually traveled this route years before. And then you've got the Wilderness Trail. The Wilderness Trail is a breakaway from the Great Wagon Road that extended westward over towards Tennessee and Kentucky across the Appalachian mountain chain, which was a big no-no back then, but many settlers and families did it. It wasn't until around 1775 when Daniel Boone actually went out and cut out a new trail for the Transylvania Company, and then created the trail through Cumberland Gap that's known as the Wilderness Trail. But there was a trail that extended out from Roanoke, Virginia, and went westward, and that occurred around 1745, between 1745 and 1750. So it's the timeline. You got to research your timeline on exactly when your ancestor left to determine, and then know their final destination to determine which road they actually took. Let's see, I'm reading comments too. Let's see, Karen says, my ancestors traveled from Georgia to Illinois in early 1800s. The wife never makes it to Illinois, and we've never found any record of her death. Would it be common as they traveled during that time for someone to just be buried along the roadway? Absolutely. I'll 110% yes. That happened often. And Bill says, my fourth great grandfather left Fairfax County, Virginia to move with new wife to settle in Caswell County after 1767. Love your timeline. I like that timeline. Not knowing this area, what road would they have taken? Okay, so you're leaving from Fairfax County, Virginia, and you're traveling into Caswell County. Probably most likely the Fall Line Road through that area, and then coming into Caswell County. Now, by 1760, you're saying 1767, you've got a lot of new roads. A lot of new roads are just springing up everywhere in North Carolina that would have taken them to Caswell County. Bill, I would suggest that you possibly look into more of the families that were living around your family in Fairfax, Virginia, and it might give you a little bit more detail on which way to look as far as the routes. But yes, I would lean more towards the Fall Line Road, but I would have to dig a little bit further to determine that for sure. And SJ says, hey SJ, thank you by the way for the Native American Indian files that you shared with me. I really appreciate that. 1737 from Pennsylvania to Augusta County, Virginia. Thought they traveled Great Wagon Road survey in 1738. It's a possibility. It's a possibility to Augusta County. It's possible. It's very possible that they could have traveled. I have found ancestors that actually traveled the Great Wagon Road prior to the Lancaster Treaty of 1744, so it is possible. Lottie Lou, how are you? Hard to know the road when you know the who. Okay, okay, all right. Let's go down to number. Okay, we went over what roads did they take. And like I said, timeline is crucial in determining exactly which road they took. And then you need to find their final destination, okay? And that will help you along the way. And look at your families too. So how long did they travel? That depends. That depends on where they embarked from, what conditions they came across through while they were traveling, what was the final destination. It greatly depends. It could have lasted from a trip from Lancaster, Pennsylvania to, we'll say, Old Salem, in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, about 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the weather. Most of the families traveled in the autumn or fall season. They would wait till after crops were harvested, and then they would make their journey then. Although there were families who traveled during all seasons, so it depends on the events that were going on in that area prior to your family leaving. And what provisions did they take? What was, as far as personal items, only what was very important to them that they could not live without. Things that they held very dear to them, because traveling this length of how far they traveled, it was just, they were limited on what items they could actually take. And provisions as far as their food and the equipment and the tools that they needed, tools to make repairs to the wagon or cart, whatever they were taking. And they could only pack the essentials that they absolutely had to have in order to set up a new home. Many people have asked me, did they take furniture with them? It was rare. It was rare. It would have had to been a very, very important piece of furniture to take with them. It was mostly small personal items that they would have taken that would make room for them in the wagon. The rest of it was provisions for them along the trip, and tools, and maybe tools of the trade for when they reach their final destination. They would begin to set up a business. They might need certain tools for that, but only the essentials were taken with them. I wanted to get back to on how long it would take for them to travel. You also got to take in consideration of sickness and death, um, weather, equipment failure, and they might have. And I told you that families traveled together. One family may have laid over at a particular camping spot or something, and one of their members were very sick, and they were not able to go forward or go onward, and maybe the rest of the party decided to leave without them. So sometimes groups would become separated. A lot of times when this happened, families would stay in that particular spot until another group would be traveling down, and then they would join that group. But yes, getting back to, let me go back to Karen's, question. Yes, many family members were buried along the way, and that for sure happened. Robin says, my sixth great-grandfather, Joseph Hines, lived in Morris County, now Hunterdon County, New Jersey, in 1760. He took his family to Guilford County, North Carolina. I don't know which road he took. Lived in Morris County, New Jersey in 1760. He took his family to Guilford County. One of two. Probably either the upper road, which is the extension of the Trader's Path, during that time period, or the Great Wagon Road. One of the two. That particular area, Robin, I'm just thinking ahead of things I've researched and read. There were a lot of families that left that particular area, and I was trying to remember the reason why during that time frame. And I want to say the majority of those traveled through the Great Wagon Road. I want to say they were Quakers. Tell me if I'm right on that. Okay. Thanks for asking that, Robin. Lottie Lou says, sorry when you don't know the who. Yeah, it's you got to know the who. That's important, Lottie. You got to know the who. SJ says, type of traveling clothes in 1730s and 1740s. Not much. You might one good shirt, one everyday shirt, probably pants every day, which, for the ladies, one good dress, one everyday dress, because these families were planning on taking the least amount with them due to the weight, and just setting up a new home and then making the things as they needed, as they set up their home. Yeah, it was very limited. Now, that's not true in every case, so let me back up, SJ. There were some families, let me say this, it depends on how well they were, how they had prospered at their previous home prior to leaving it. There were some families that I have traced that carried a wagon of belongings and then had a separate wagon of provisions. So do some research and see how well they were prospering in the area before they left. And that'll give you some clues and hints about what items like clothing and what other personal items they may have taken with them. That's a good question. Thank you, guys.